have breaking news this evening. The NHL and the Players Association have tentatively agreed to a new CBA. So we're going to discuss the framework of that and how the process will go now to have that deal ratified. And we're also looking at some offseason rumors focusing on the Oilers and Blackhawks. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. We finally have an announcement from the NHL and the Players Association on a tentative CBA deal. Obviously, we've been talking about this, which feels like an eternity now. Pretty much every day we've been hearing it could be today, maybe tomorrow. Well, today is the day. It's finally here. Of course, last night on our report, we indicated that we had reports saying that the NHL was likely not getting it past today. Like today was going to be like the absolute latest that it happened. I was starting to wonder though as the day was starting to go on, but we finally have this announced. So here are some of the details. Of course, we've already gone through a lot of the other stuff that was being leaked previously in the CBA, so we can confirm as well that the Olympic participation is definitely built in. So pending an agreement with the IOC, which I really don't see being an issue, there will be NHL participation at the Olympics in 2022 and 2026. So that is some big news there. This wasn't the same without the NHL players the last time around. So that to me is absolutely huge. Olympic hockey is highly entertaining, putting the best on best from around the world. We also did get confirmation this is an extension for an additional 4 years on top of the 2 years that were already remaining. So that will take us to 2026. So we very well could be entering one of the longest periods of labor peace we've seen really in recent memory here. So this is great news. Obviously, this NHL pause due to the COVID-19 virus is taking a big enough hit financially on this league as well as many other sectors around the world. So clearly the NHL wants to avoid any other work stoppages in the future. It's nice to see the owners and the players getting along and getting this deal done. Obviously, this is not a situation that we expected to be in, although CBA talks had picked up and we're starting before the pause happened, but this really allowed them to really hone in on getting this deal done, as it's more important now than ever for the long-term viability and stability of this game. A few other quick details. It was being reported as well that the NHL minimum salary would be going up, and I believe it still is. This doesn't sound like it's going to be effective for next season. I saw some information from Chris Johnston of Sportsnet indicating that it looks as though they'll be staying at $700,000 for next year. So hopefully we'll get a clarification on that, but it will likely still be going up over the course of this agreement. Like I said, it was supposed to be going to $750, then up to $800 by the end of the time here. Now we also get some more information that some of the rookie bonuses on the entry-level contracts, the amount they can earn, has gone up from $850K to $1 million. So that allows rookies to earn a little bit extra money. So of course that's good news as well. We already had reports about the over 35 contracts being changed so that they would not have that long-term impact on the cap if somebody were to retire. So obviously that was good news, I think, for both parties. The question as well was around some of these NHL rookies that were hoping to sign contracts and jump in here to this return to play. That impacts players like Ilya Sorokin of the Islanders, of course, Kaprizov in Minnesota, and Romanov of Montreal. I know on the other video yesterday, I think or the day before, I said Markov, not Romanov, and somebody corrected me in the comments, which obviously that was a slip of the tongue. Obviously, I meant to say Alex Romanov, but clearly I'm not sure what I was thinking. I had Markov on the brain somehow. Both Russian defensemen, of course, but those guys will be able to sign contracts, and it will burn a year, but they're not going to be able to participate in the return to play. So for a guy like Sorokin, he's only eligible for a 1-year entry-level deal because the fact of his age. So obviously, that could be impactful for him. He could sign a 1-year deal and then have it expired basically immediately and become a restricted free agent and be looking for his second contract, which would allow him to probably have a little bit more negotiating power to get a little bit more money sooner than later, which is probably good for him. That very well could pick up talks to get Sorokin signed to the Islanders, even though I'm sure he would rather play. But money does talk. When it comes to the other guys with Kaprizov and Romanov, it might be enticing to them to have a year burnt off, which means they come out of their entry-level deals sooner, and obviously they can go for the next contract sooner, get it into a free agency sooner, all that stuff. So obviously that will be appealing. So we'll see, even though if they can't play, if that'll be enticing enough to those players to finalize deals. Now with Romanov, we had reports a while back that him and Montreal had agreed to terms on a contract, but it was believed it wasn't signed. They were kind of waiting for clarification of when that contract would start. So I do believe that they still need to finalize and actually put ink to paper on that contract, if I'm not mistaken on that. There are some key dates, and I'll put up the statement here from the NHL and the Players Association that they released earlier this evening. Here are the dates that you need to be aware of when it comes to everything being effective. Now, as we talked before, this deal still needs to be ratified, which means the NHL, as the owners, need to vote, and the Players Association needs to vote. Now, the Players Association Executive Committee, apparently they're going to be going to their teams with all of the information and kind of getting a general sense on how the vote's going to go. So they have to approve it first as a committee and then full membership vote. So that's probably going to take 2, 3, maybe 4 days. It just depends. It is expected by the end of the week that all of that voting will be taking place. The owners' part will be much quicker. They're expected to have a vote via conference call likely sometime this week, probably the next day or two would be my guess. And they are, of course, are expected to vote in favor of this agreement. The players at this point are expected to vote in favor of it as well. And I guess we'll just need to make it official, but it's likely going to be the end of the week before it's all signed, sealed, and fully accepted and make official in that regard. Now, when it comes to players being able to opt out, we talked about this before as well. Players can just say, I'm not participating, and that's it. There's no questions asked, but they're going to have until 3 days after the deal is ratified for them to get that information to their teams, and then of course they have to submit roster to the league on who is going to be participating in this return to play playoff tournament to complete the 1920 season. So they will have 3 days. So they're likely going to have approximately a week or so from now to make up their minds and get that information relayed on to the appropriate people if there's any players that are going to be sitting out. I know I've seen some players indicate that they had some concerns, but I've seen other players say that, you know what, hockey players seem to have a different mentality and they don't expect anybody to sit out, but I guess you can't speak for everyone. We'll have to see. Of course, if there's any especially bigger names that decide not to play, that could certainly impact their team's chances at a Stanley Cup. So I guess we'll have to remain to be seen on that. There was some additional testing as well completed by the NHL for COVID-19, and there were some more positive tests. Of course, we don't know who they are. We don't know what teams they're with either, but there were some more positives. I think at this point, it's fair to say the Phase 2 protocols are not nearly as tight as Phase 3 and 4. After all the information we had in the last day or two about how those protocols are going to work, I am fairly confident that if players can get through their training camps, that's going to be the trickier part, especially we're in a lot of these U.S. markets where the virus is certainly running rampant right now. But if they can be in a tighter bubble for Phase 3 to stay in their city, get through their camps, then I don't suspect that there'll be too many issues beyond that. We've seen some sports run into issues. We've seen other sports do quite well. So I guess we'll have to hope that for hockey's sake and all these players' sake that the risks are not too great and that they are successful in getting the season completed, because we certainly don't want anybody to be sick or anything worse than that. So we'll have to see how that's going to go. But for right now, this is great news. We might have labor peace well beyond until 2026. Now, as I mentioned, I want to take a look at some Hawks and Oilers offseason rumor talk. Of course, with the news of the salary cap, which has been negotiated here into this CBA to remain flat for another year, probably 2 to 3 years before we see an increase. That's really going to hamper a lot of teams' ability to get players signed and to make the moves that they were expecting to make. And when it comes to the Chicago Blackhawks, that Brent Seabrook contract is really going to be that much more of an albatross with a flat cap. They were already going to have issues because of it, but obviously, not being able to get that cap increase to get some other guys signed is going to be very, very problematic. Now, of course, we saw Seabrook miss a big part of the year, had multiple, pretty big surgeries, and we'll see if he can come back and play. Obviously, he ends up on an LTIR. That might be one way they can get relief, but at this point, I don't have information to suggest that would happen, but he still has 4 more years left on his contract. He's making $6.8 million. He has a full no-move clause until 2022, which not only does that complicate things for trading him, but it means that they have to protect him for the Seattle expansion job because he has a no-move clause. So they could end up losing another player because of it if they still have him on their roster when that time comes. So obviously the Chicago Blackhawks, like I said, are going to be trying to move the Brent Seabrook contract, but it's not going to be easy at all. Out of all the veterans on that team right now, he is the worst contract because not only of his play recently, but of course of the terms associated. They just can't get away from it very easily. Of course, guys like Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Duncan Keith even are still playing at a much better level than Brent Seabrook has recently. So can the Blackhawks find a way out of this contract? Can Stan Bowman work some magic? Can he find a new home for Brent Seabrook? I came across an article in the Chicago Sun-Times discussing this contract and how much of an impact it's going to have on this team and whether or not they could find a way to move the contract. I mean, there would not be very many teams that would be willing to take it or have the ability to take it. Then, of course, to complicate matters worse, he has to agree to it. So unless Brent Seabrook wants to go play for Detroit or for Ottawa or for New Jersey or a team like that who has all kinds of spaces, not to say that they even would want him, it's just really going to handcuff Stan Bowman and the Blackhawks here. They're likely going to end up losing a pretty decent player in the expansion draft if they can't move him. But it's that much more important now than ever for them to try to move him if they can. Otherwise, like I said, they're going to end up losing probably a younger player that they really don't want to when it comes time for the Seattle expansion. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Can the Blackhawks find a way out of this Brent Seabrook contract? Give me your ideas down below on how they could facilitate a trade. And of course, as I mentioned as well, the Edmonton Oilers are another team we want to take a look at. There's multiple articles that I've come across today talking about the Oilers. We saw one in The Athletic, and of course another one, David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, talking about their cap issues as well. What moves they might have to make to get this team as best as possible moving forward. Now, of course, beyond one more year, they have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins coming up for a free agency, which is going to be a big contract for them. Clearly, at this point, it's going to be really tough for them to afford that deal, even though I'm very certain that they would love to keep him. He's a pretty solid two-way forward now. He's really evolved over the years since being drafted first overall by the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, he's an expensive number 3 center if you look at it, but he often plays up on the wing in the top 2 lines. He's proven to be a pretty versatile player, and I can't imagine that the Oilers would want to lose him through free agency, but obviously they have many other contracts they need to take a look at here. They have other UFAs coming up this offseason, including guys like Tyler Ennis as well as Mike Green and Mike Smith. I think Mike Smith likely departs. As far as Mike Green goes, I can see him maybe staying and signing a cheap 1-year contract. Same thing for Tyler Ennis. Would not be shocked if Ken Holland were able to bring those guys back on pretty cheap veteran deals. But when it comes to some RFAs, they also have guys like Ethan Bear who needs a new deal, and he certainly played pretty well this year. You got Andreas Athanasiou who needs a new contract as well. So it's pretty likely that a player could get moved out, like a Chris Russell, for example, maybe even the real deal James Neal. I know he got off to a pretty good start last year in Edmonton, but of course he ended up having some injury issues, kind of faded a little bit near the end. I guess we'll see how he does in the playoffs, if he can get himself back playing like he did early in the season. I mean, he was looking like he was going to be a for sure 30-goal scorer. And of course, like I said, injuries kind of took over there and he missed a bunch of time. But that contract that James Neal and Chris Russell have could prove to be very problematic in keeping a lot of their other younger players. And again, like I said about Chicago, it's not just about the cap. It's also about the Seattle expansion draft coming at the end of next season that they have to be concerned about as well. Obviously, when it comes to a guy like James Neal, they could expose him in the expansion draft. That wouldn't be the end of the world. But at the same time, if they can't afford to keep some other younger players, and that's more of an issue. Now, when it comes to the Oilers, I've mentioned before, I thought Chris Russell was an ideal buyout candidate if they can't trade him when we hit this current offseason after the 1920 season is completed, and I do think that's a pretty likely scenario. I know the articles that I'm referencing here today kind of talk about the fact that they're the prime current candidates that need to go to make the necessary space to be able to keep a lot of other guys, or they're going to run into issues where signing Nugent-Hopkins might be impossible, and they might not have any choice to either lose him to free agency or possibly even trade him next year before they get to that, so that they get something in return. But considering how well the Oilers rebounded this year, they don't want to really lose a top player like Nugent-Hopkins. I can't imagine. They need to get some stuff sorted out here, and obviously this flat cap is going to be very problematic, and we're probably going to end up seeing a fair bit of NHL movement and players getting bought out or moved around because of the situation. Since they're not going to have those compliance buyouts that many teams would love to have, they're going to have to find other creative ways to shed themselves of these bad contracts to keep their players that they are important to their longer-term success here. So let me know how you think the Oilers handle their offseason cap issues, of course. Do you think a guy like Chris Russell or James Neal are the prime candidates to be moved out or bought out to make the necessary space? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.